Hey everyone. So for this time around on what I guess we're calling our little tech talk, um, we have my MotoMorini 500cc race bike, and I had a failure on it last year where my transmission basically walked its way out of the end of my crankcase. And but what it was to me when I was riding is suddenly I couldn't shift, and I was between gears, couldn't find any gears, pulled off track. But when when my race was over, when I got back to the pits, I looked in, realized my chain was drooping quite a bit. My sprocket could move back and forth. My front sprocket could just wiggle back and forth. And what had happened was that the output shaft, where the end of the sprocket is coming through here, had basically the bearing that holds it there had fallen apart, and the shaft was able to get pulled backwards by the rear wheel and had ground out a significant portion of this, making this round hole into basically an oval. Now, before we get to what I did to fix it, I want to show you what I did to do it. I've realized after taking it apart that this was completely my fault. The funny thing about this motor for me is I started building this engine years ago. I first built this engine years ago when I had no idea what I was doing. And I've since gone through it a couple of times and found my old mistakes when I was my early 20s, which is embarrassing, but also nice to see that we do come along, we do learn things, and all that stuff we thought didn't matter when we were in our 20s really does kind of matter quite a bit. So in this case, the bearing I was supposed to use is one of these, and you can see that the inner sleeve, the inner race, has a lip on it right there. So it goes in, and it can't push through. Now, when I called my local bearing house back in those halcyon days in Brooklyn, they had one of these bearings. It doesn't have that lip. It can push right on through. I didn't know the difference. I didn't have this bearing in my hand. I was just working in my apartment. I grabbed the bearing that they had, put it in, and for 15 years, it was fine. I didn't, it was strange. There was really no effect of it, it seemed. Although in retrospect, I did always have an oil leak out of there, and that was because the shaft was probably wiggling back and forth more and moving that oil seal around in a way that it shouldn't move. But other than that, no big deal. So only when this failed and I took it apart and I looked at this part, and then I looked at the parts diagram and I looked at the actual parts number for this with all of my wise experience now, I was like, this is the wrong bearing I had in there. And that wouldn't have happened with this one. So live and learn, double check things. Also, little quick note, all those little numbers on your bearing, they mean something. Those little letters and numbers, each one signifies something. So if they don't all add up, make sure that they do, or if they don't, that it's okay that they don't, because they pretty much need to all be the same for the most part. So yeah, that was me being young and dumb, and now I'm old and wise and fixing my young and dumb mistakes, and hopefully this bike will run forever and ever. So what I had to do, and I thought long and hard about it, a friend of mine suggested that we chuck it in a mill and basically make the hole bigger, and then put a bigger seal in there. But I didn't like losing all the meat, because you'd have to basically, it was ground. You see how this boss is raised here. It was ground through that on this side. And so you would have had to come out and have a much thinner contact area for the seal. That wouldn't have been holding in very well. It just didn't seem like it was going to work very well. So I decided I would just throw a bunch of weld at it. So I welded up this with a bunch of gobs of aluminum. And if you ever welded cast aluminum, it's dirty, it's messy, especially if it's got oil impregnated in it. So it's just, you have to really keep cleaning it out as that oil works its way to the surface. But I basically welded up enough that I could then put it into a miniature mill, basically, and get a round area going again. And then I finished it by hand. I still have a little bit to do, but made a round circle that the seal will fit back into. It's not pretty, and I'm definitely not the best aluminum welder in the world. So all you good welders out there, you could do it better, I have no doubt. But what I'm looking for is something that'll function. It's not holding the bearing in here, so it's not a structural thing. I just need enough meat to hold the seal in place. Inside, there's plenty of room to hold the bearing, so I'm not worried about that. I just needed something to hold the seal there and to not leak. So that's that. With that done, I'm ready to put this thing back together and hopefully run. We had a race in about 2.5 weeks. I think I can make it. Yeah, that's about it. So I'm not sure what the lesson here is other than check your parts. Yeah, if you have any interesting stories about things you had to fix that you yourself did wrong earlier, those are always interesting, always good stories. Yeah, thanks for watching.